One may infer from Kinzer's article that he classifies any country capitalist as long as Marxist socialism is not his official ideology. He seems to think it's like he's living in the digital world, right? It's 1 or 0. So if it's not Marxist, it's got to be capitalist. To him, there's nothing. It's not analog. There's nothing in between. So that's how he wants to see the world. And he states, comparing the two political and social systems also reminds us that for many people in the world, a truly fulfilling life is unattainable. The best hope for long-time communist Cuba and its long-time capitalist neighbors would be to learn from each other. So my purpose here is not to focus on Kinzer's curiously positive statements about Cuba, although he does concede that life is not great in Cuba. So he's not just an apologist for that the system there. And its social safety net, which is what he points to. I mean, his basic argument here is that Cuba has a much more elaborate social safety net than all those other countries he named. Therefore, and Cuba's socialist, nominally or in real sense, and therefore the others must be capitalists, because what else is there, right? It's either socialist or capitalist. That's it. So I don't want to talk about his views of Cuba, but he apparently regards that the designation, the word capitalist, as so uncontroversial for these other countries that he feels no need to justify it, and he doesn't in the article, or even to define the term. So you just have to infer what he must mean by that. Now, if Kinzer was the only person doing this, it probably wouldn't be worth coming here to give you a talk about it. But he's not an anomaly. So let's go to let's say the other side of the political spectrum. Consider Richard Posner's book about the recent financial debacle with the title, A Failure of Capitalism. Surprise, surprise. Posner is no left-leaning journalist. He probably wouldn't have much nice to say about Cuba. He's a federal judge with a long association with the University of Chicago and the market-oriented law and economics movement. Yet here is Posner blaming capitalism for the current economic troubles and, as a result, embracing Keynesianism. He writes in his preface, quote, "We are learning from it," and by it he calls it the Depression, "that we need a more active and intelligent government to keep our model of a capitalist economy from running off the rails." So he obviously sees a more active government as perfectly consistent with, quote, our model of a capitalist economy. Continuing to quote, "The movement to regulate the financial industry went too far by exaggerating the resilience, the healing powers of laissez-faire capitalism." Now, it may be news to you that we've had laissez-faire capitalism for the last 20 years. I live in Conway. I have an excuse. You guys live near Washington, D.C. You don't have an excuse. If you didn't know about it, it reflects much worse on you than me. Because, I have the little newspaper, the Democratic Gazette, to read about. And some people in this room don't know what I'm talking about. Okay. No, Posner is hardly a lone wolf on his end of the political spectrum. Tune into financial programs on the Fox News Channel, the Fox Business Channel, the Business Network any day, and you'll hear Lawrence Kudlow, Ben Stein, and any number of other economic conservatives warning that Barack Obama's policies threaten to, quote, undermine our capitalist system. That certainly implies that there is a capitalist system here to undermine. I think logic would demand that we conclude that. So what then is this system called capitalism? If people can write like this and it's not considered terribly controversial. I mean, I complain or I throw my shoe at the TV, but it's probably not happening around the country. It can't be the free market. Capitalism can't be the free market because we don't have a free market. Today, the hand of government is all over the economy, from money and banking to transportation to manufacturing to agriculture to insurance to basic research to world trade. If the meaning of a concept consists in how it is used, I'm being a little Wittgensteinian here, there's no Platonic form of capitalism to divine and see what it is its essence. We can't do that. Then capitalism can't mean the free market. Rather, it designates a system in which, I'm using a process of inference here again, a system in which the means of production are de jure privately owned, but left open is the question of government intervention or the degree of freedom. It seems to me as long as you have de jure private ownership, it's going to be called a capitalist, whether it's very free or very unfree. That's left out of it, it seems to me. Left open is this question. So the phrases free market capitalism and laissez-faire capitalism, which you notice we libertarians are often forced to use, right? There's a reason for that. Those are not seen as redundant. People typically don't see those redundant. And the phrases state capitalism and crony capitalism and political capitalism as a whole, monopoly capitalism, those are not seen as contradictions. So if without controversy capitalism can take the qualifiers free market and state, that tells us something. And this is true regardless of what the dictionary said. Because lexicographers, at least since the time of Samuel Johnson, understood that dictionaries are descriptive, not prescriptive. And dictionaries are updated and new editions are issued in order to take account of new usages that came in since the time of the last dictionary. So we can't really arbitrate this by going to the dictionary. Words change. Okay, so this is not just a semantic point, it sounds like. One wonders about the value of spending time arguing whether what we really have is capitalism or not. And I hear people do this. So someone will say capitalism caused this mess, but we don't really have capitalism. And then you end up in this endless, I think, pointless discussion about whether what we have is really capitalism, instead of talking about what might have caused the debacle and what governments have done or didn't do. Okay, and it's also more than a matter of rhetoric or the art of persuasion, although I think that's important, because we do want to persuade people, and if we're using terms that aren't clear, I think we're hampering our ability to persuade. It seems to me that it's a matter of historical understanding. For although Ludwig von Mises and Ayn Rand and others tried mightily to have capitalism understood as free market, they were swimming upstream. As historian Clarence Carson wrote in the Freeman in the 1980s, I was astounded when I found this article, by the way, last year. I didn't know this article existed. He wrote an article called Capitalism, Yes and No. It's online. You should look it up. And Clarence Carson was a sort of a real staunch, dyed-in-the-wool-feet type, wrote a lot of books on history, the history of the United States, Constitution, stuff like that, about communism. So he's not, he's not some hippie, or, you know what I mean? He's not some guy trying to come up with some non-standard use of a word just to make his mark or something like that. He's a serious, sober state historian. He wrote in the 1980s, capitalism does not have a commonly accepted meaning. Proponents of it, to the contrary notwithstanding, as matters stand, it cannot be used with precision in discourse. Carson wondered why one would call a system in which production and exchange are carried on privately capitalism. And he writes, so far as I can make out, there is no compelling reason to do so. There's nothing indicated in such arrangements that suggests why capital among the elements of production should be singled out for emphasis. Why not land? Why not labor? Or indeed, why should any of the elements be singled out? Close quote. Now, there are other curious features of this word. And believe me, I'm not going to talk about the semantics the whole time. As Carson wrote, when an ism is added to a word, it denotes a system of belief, and probably what has come to be called ideology, close quote. And the same thing is true with the suffix ist, right? You go from ism to ist. But a capitalist is not one who advocates capitalism, right? In the way that a socialist is one who advocates socialism. A capitalist is one who owns capital and fulfills a certain role in the economy. A capitalist can be a socialist without contradiction. We probably all know of some, right? So, you can be a socialist capitalist. That's funny. Law's line. Okay. So, it's also useful to bear in mind that the word was not initially embraced by free market advocates. This was apparently, what I'm told, I haven't researched this myself, but this is more of a 20th century phenomenon. I don't know who began to use it as a badge of honor. And say, okay, you call us capitalists? Good. Yeah, we are capitalists, and there's a good reason to call ourselves capitalists. That's a later development. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the word capitalist, as opposed to capitalism, first was used and pejoratively in the late 18th century. Of course, Marx used it and its related words as condemnation, but it was not opponents of private property who first used the words that way. Somebody who predates Marx, namely Thomas Hodgkin, who was a free market liberal, free trader, Herbert Spencer's mentor at The Economist magazine, lived 1787 to 1868.